It's great to be here this morning speaking with Bradford Morrow, who's a novelist, editor, essayist, poet, children's book writer, professor of literature at Bard Center, fellow at Bard College, and the founding editor of Conjunction's literary magazine. Have I left anything important out there?
Well, I studied to be a bookbinder when I was in my teens, but that didn't go. That's about it. I think I've tried to do everything with a book that you can do at one point or another in my life.
And we're here today because you just released The Forger's Daughter. And it's got a Poe connection, so that's why we're talking to you here at the Poe Museum. We had hoped you'd be able to come here in person, but maybe next year you'll be able to make it. And by the way, I'm Chris Semtner, the curator here at the Poe Museum. So I got calls from Bradford while he was working on the book so he could make sure it was historically accurate. And first of all, let's start with, how did you first discover Edgar Allan Poe and his works?
How did I first discover his works?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in a house where there really weren't very many books, oddly enough, Chris. I've made up for that since, as you can see behind me. But one of the books that was in my father's collection, his shelf from college, was a modern library edition of like a Best Tales of Edgar Allan Poe, or a Poe anthology in modern library. And that and Emerson's essays were the two books that I just basically stole from my father and read them and kept them in my room, and they became my, not so much my property, it's just my my heritage somehow. Those, and I know that Poe and Emerson, it was interesting later to find out their relationship, but those were the two 19th century writers that I was most devoted to. So Poe has always been a part of my life since really childhood days. And you know, as I got older, I got very interested in the Gothic, and even did an anthology back in the 90s called The New Gothic. And in that anthology, my co-editor and I tried to map out the history of the Gothic, which is relatively short chronologically in time, as you know, Chris. It's a 18th century phenomenon.
Yeah, made to Horace Walpole and around that.
Horace Walpole, yeah, and then Matthew Gregory Lewis, the monk, and that's that sort of first wave, first generation. Then Poe just frankly took it, and as he did with so many things, he made it new, to use Ezra Pound's phrase. He recreated it in it, you know. And my esteem for Poe, as I began to understand more richly the meaning of a tale like Murders in the Rue Morgue, or Purloined Letter, The Mystery of, you know, Marie Roget, that Poe invented. Not only did he develop the Gothic, but he invented, you know, the narrative of detection. And you know, I'm less a fan of the poems, although I've written about his first efforts here in The Forger's Daughter. But I've always been devoted to Poe. Yeah, by the way, just at the outset, I want to thank you. I know that I have a chance to do it in person, for all the insightful help that you gave me. You saved me from sometimes minutia that I might have, you know, gone astray on something very small. But I think a good book, you know, fails or succeeds often based on the little things, and especially if you're creating a work of fiction in which there's historical details, you want to make sure you get all of that right. So it was a pleasure to work with you.
It was a pleasure hearing from you and seeing the work develop. It's great to see the little adjustments you made along the way. Is there any major change that you made that you just didn't see coming in the beginning?
Oh, probably quite a few. I think I've completely got out, my subconsciously suppressed them or forgotten them. I knew the basic architecture of the book. I knew that it was going to have a 13th Tamerlane as a centerpiece in the book, and the forging of a 13th Tamerlane. That I knew all along. I knew that the nemesis of my character from the previous book, of which this is the sequel, who's a forger of primarily, well, W.B. Yeats, Henry James, but mostly Arthur Conan Doyle. I knew that I wanted him to be, for 20 years, so to say, clean and sober, and not a forger anymore. You know, living a life that's exemplary. He actually works at an auction house in New York. His wife's an antiquarian bookseller, and he narrowly escaped being murdered by his nemesis in the last scenes in the Forges. I don't want to tell too much about the Forgers. By the way, this book is written. One thing I also wanted to do, Chris, is make sure this book can be read as a standalone. You can read this book without having read the Forgers. Hopefully, if you enjoy the book, then you can go back and read the Forgers, and you'll have an even richer experience. And then I have a third one in mind, I think, just to because I'm so interested in forgery and in these in biblio mysteries as a genre.
What do you think is the lure of forgery? Because people are very interested in book forgery, manuscript forgery, painting forgery. There's several books about it. I mean, what is it that draws people to the forger? Or what draws
I think
the forger?
What draws me?
Yeah.
I think that people, well, let me start with the forgers. What interests a forger in forgery? And I think a lot of it can be the monetary, consequences of making a great forgery of some important painting or by a famous painter, or in this case, the rarest book in American literature, make a forgery of that and pull it off. That's part of it. But I think the money, if you are pardon me the expression, a major forger, if you really are, that's what you're devoted to, that's your life. I think it has a lot to do with hoodwinking experts. I think there's a lot of ego involved in being a forger, because to be a good forger, you have to know so much, Chris. You have chemistry, history. You have to know the biography of whatever author you're going to be forging. You have to know the dates when there might be composers also are forged. There's musical manuscripts that are forged as well. You have to know exactly where the composer was during that week or two where they've, maybe there's no biographical understanding of what was transpiring in the author's life, or the composer's life, or the painter's life. There's your opportunity. And so I think it's an intellectual game. Granted, it's a felonious game, and you're pulling off a fraud. But I think deeper for forgers, that you're kind of playing God. You're recreating history. You're making history that didn't ever happen. There's a line in that U2 song, "Even better than the real thing," that I've always liked, because I thought, well, what does that mean, even better than the real thing? Well, I think a forger would find that a captivating line, because what you're trying to do is create something that's so good and so flawless that it also has to be imperfect. It can't be too flawless. It's a very, it's a small needle you're trying to thread. And also, I think there's an element too, that interests me, is the psychological element of how people every day, one way or another, could be seen as forging themselves, as like recreating themselves, retooling themselves in whatever, to make themselves palatable, or to make themselves more powerful, or make themselves more believable in different instances. So there's a quality of forgery that runs deep. The word forgery too, the word forger, it used to be a great word to forge ahead. In the 14th century, there was nothing negative about the word forgery, or forge. It had to do with making things and building things, and you forge in an ironworks. But now forgery is scandalous because it's two-faced. deceptive and deceitful. But I really do think a large part, to repeat, about for a forgery is to pull it off and outdo the experts, outdo the historians, outdo the auction and bibliophiles, and have your midnight work emerge in the light of day and to be counted as real. It's a very complex world of forgery.
And you did double this time. You not only tried to forge Poe's first book, Tamerlane, but also to make it a signed copy. So they had to forge the book itself and his writing.
Yeah, you had asked earlier, what did I know I was going to do, what I maybe found later that I wanted to do. And I think forging that signature was a later development. As I was writing the book, maybe I got more ambitious on behalf of my protagonist, because there are no, as you know, no signed copies of Tamerlane. Poe's name is not on Tamerlane for a variety of reasons. It's not on there. It's just by a Bostonian. And so to have a signed one would be the ultimate copy, which is, again, the forger's ambition is to make the ultimate copy. And there's a letter too, a forged letter involved as well. So our main character, who is a forger, who's been forced through a threat of another forger, been forced back into the business for one job, to do this one thing. He's really kind of torn, because on the one hand, he doesn't want to be back involved in forging. He's gone out of his way to lead a straight life, a normal life. And on the other hand, when he gets involved with the printing of Tamerlane, the selection of papers and the color of the ink and the chemistry involved in the ink, so it'll crackle just exactly right or not crackle. He found himself fully back in his old life. He actually loves doing that. So I mean, it's just a part of his life. But yeah, no, I didn't see the signature coming. And even in the end, when I almost didn't do it, but then I thought, no, let's go all the way, because that's what he would do. He would go all the way.
But this time he brings his daughter into it.
He does. The daughter really is a very important character as far as I'm concerned, because at the end of The Forgers, we see her just as a 6-year-old girl. She's a young girl. The last scene, she's sitting. It's a scene that I really like. She's sitting at the kitchen table in New York and with her father, who's has recovered. He's lost a lot of use of one of his hands, but he's recovered enough. And he's teaching her how to draw. And she's flooring him by drawing almost perfect circles and nearly straight lines, which is very difficult for anybody to do, period. So he sees in her, concentric circles. He sees in her a prodigy. So, but she's never been asked to forge before. It's never been part of their lives. She's an art student in New York City, and she's, an eccentric. I really adore her. Name is Nicole, and she through various means she understands the jeopardy her father faces, the trouble he's in, because there's a very, 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 very dark secret that will ruin his life, the whole family's life, in his background. And when she understands that, she has a choice to make, and she decides to help him with his forgery. He's not old, but you have to have such a steady, sure hand. You can't make mistakes when you're forging. I believe in the novel they have 3 pieces of paper. So like in a fairy tale, threes, first one you can fail, and so he does not like his post signature. He put a very distinctive handwriting, but it also, as you know, Chris, it changed a bit over time, and depending upon his mood and perhaps whether it was late at night or whether he perhaps had something to drink or who knows what. But he's pretty. The handwriting is pretty easy to read. He has an extraordinary hand, and Will just doesn't feel equal to it. So that's when the daughter helps him to finish it. That's the choice she makes. It's a choice made out of love, and she's a very interesting character. So yes, it's a collaboration between the two of them.
And there's also another main character, the wife, who's involved in this, and we're seeing the novel actually from two different perspectives. What was your decision behind the narrators?
That's a really interesting question. I started writing the book in the daughter's voice. I think it was before I had written you to seek your advice. I started in the daughter's voice, and that just wasn't working. There were things she didn't know that I need for the reader to know. So I scrapped that, and I started writing it then in Will's voice. Now, Will, if you read the first book or have read the first book, you'll know he's a kind of classic, unreliable narrator. So I thought, a lot of people read The Forgers, and I don't necessarily wanted them to go to The Forger's Daughter and find out, oh, here's Will again. What do I trust? What do I not trust? But I wanted his voice in there because he knows things that other people don't know. I thought, oh, okay, let's try a dual voice. And that seemed to work out wonderfully well for me, because there are things in anybody's relationship with another person, or any marriage, would say, where one knows some things the other just simply doesn't know. And that kind of goes to the whole notion of forgery again. There are things, secrets that people have from one another. So that's true in this book. But here, some of the secrets are huge and some of the secrets are small. But by dual voicing the narrative, and it's just one next one, it's not complicated particularly. Yeah. You begin to see as a reader, you're the third person. You're the triangulation point. You can see both of them, and from that you're able to kind of discern the truth as you're going along for yourself. And you may be right or you may be wrong, but it gives me an opportunity also to have things occur that the wife, that Megan does not see, or that Will does not see. So yeah, I think it gave the book an extra layer of richness, of perceptions that are available to the reader that, if it's just a single narrator in this case, wouldn't have done quite as well. So that's why I went with that. That seemed to work once I started doing that.
And it flowed really well. They just alternated chapters, so you didn't have any doubt of who was speaking.
Yeah, I think it's, I really don't think there's any more difficulty involved in reading a dual narrative than just one narrator. And in this case, I do think it worked. Also, their voices are not wildly dissimilar, because I think when people live together for decades, they take on each other's verbal tics, and they share a kind of a vocabulary and certain interests and things. So you'll see that I've written other novels in female voices, quite a few actually, several anyhow. The Almanac Branch, and The Diviner's Tale, Ariel's Crossing. So I'm comfortable writing in a so-called woman, in a woman's voice. And if you think about it, it's a human being's voice is what we're talking about. But there are differences. So there are differences. They're subtle. But again, like you say, what I wanted was for the narrative to flow rather smoothly. And it's a straightforward narrative chronologically. You're not jumping all over the place. there's some background that's given to us by Will primarily. But yeah, I thought that worked out. I don't think I'd ever done that before. I remember back in the 90s, my editor at Viking Penguin, wonderful editor, senior editor there, and I was going to do another book in two voices, and she advised me, no, Brad, that's cheating. It's the cheap way out. It's the easy way to go. It's like, so I listened to her and I did it another way, which is fine. Then all these years later, I'm finding that's not an easy way out. That's hard to do, a dual voice stick, because you need to create a rhythm between the two voices and have them not bounce the reader out or break the the sacred trust between the page and the reader. So it was very liberating in a lot of ways.
And having two narrators really shows you just a very Poe-esque theme of how unreliable a narrator is. Were you thinking about Poe at all there? His narrators you very often can't believe.
Yeah, you can't trust Poe narrators. It's a big difference between Conan Doyle, the Sherlock Holmes tales, and Poe. I mean, and Agatha Christie too, for that matter. I mean, Agatha Christie, like Poe, was a genius at creating unreliable narratives. The mystery of what is it? One of her most famous ones, and I'm just not pulling it off the top of my head. But she's a genius at that, and so is Poe. Conan Doyle, on the other hand, I think with Holmes, I mean, the mystery is the unreliable thing. What Conan Doyle, what Sherlock Holmes is trying to investigate. Therein lies the unreliable. The clues are unreliable. But with Poe, it's pretty much everything. It's a wild ride with most of Poe, any of Poe's work, really.
And a lot of people watching and listening to this are already big Poe fans. They might have heard that Tamerlane was Poe's first book. There's only 12 surviving copies, and The Forger's Daughter is about the 13th copy, how they find one, how they try to forge one. And in the process of research, you got to get up close with 3 original copies of Tamerlane. What was that like? Actually, did you get to hold them? Or did they just make you stay back a bit?
No, I got to put a little DNA on all 3 of them. I got to touch them and hold them and very, very, very gingerly and carefully open them up and look at them. There's a couple of particular pages in Tamerlane itself that I reference in the novel, and I wanted to look at the 3 different copies, look at those particular pages. There's some broken type on one of the pages. And yeah, I saw the 2 copies that are at New York Public Library in the Bird collection. And then the wonderful Susan Taine, who introduced us, her copy is one of 2 known copies in private hands. And when I first went up to look at her treasures, I let her and Gabriel, her assistant, her librarian, let them handle it. But I think it was the second visit up, she finally let me hold it. And I thought, if there was ever a book you don't want to drop or or do anything, there's a copy in Philadelphia as well, which I really wanted to get down to visit. I had everything set up, but a combination of things didn't allow for me to get down there before the book went to press. And next week, actually, they're going to put their copy on display during an event, and I'll get to see it at least on a computer screen. But I'm very curious whatever happened to the copy that was stolen from the University of Virginia. One wonders, where is that material? It's not just that book, but a lot of things. But maybe you and I were corresponding at one point. I remember you saying maybe this will drive another copy out of the woodwork. that would be a dream come true, wouldn't it? And
Yeah,
maybe
hopefully
somebody, that'd be great, right, Chris?
the rerun of Antiques Roadshow, when they show the Poe daguerreotype, people start bringing out their Poe photos. So maybe this,
Yeah, yeah.
somebody take a second look at that little book. The one in Susan Taine's collection was just in a box of farmers' almanacs, and somebody bought the whole lot of them and had no idea that this valuable book was wedged in the middle of all of it.
Yeah, for like $15 or something. It was
Yeah.
just for peanuts. Well, the copy, the first copy that was really surfaced was also, it surfaced of all places in London at then the British Museum, now the British Library. And that was sold too, Chris, in a bundle of bound group of pamphlets from the era. And nobody suspected particularly that there was a Poe, that Edgar Allan Poe's first book was in the lot. They tend to show up around once a generation or so. That's been in recent years, every 30 years, whatever, that they show up. So we're due for a new Tamerlane. I think it would be, what a wonderful thing that would be.
So there were probably around 50 copies printed, so there could very well be more out there, and could just be in a family's collection.
Well, like the one that's in this book, in Forger's Daughter. It's been in a family collection going back to the 19th century. Nobody really thought much about it one way or the other, Bostonian family. So, it's likely, if it does turn up, it'll be probably in the northeast somewhere, maybe down south as far as where you are, from Richmond up to Boston. But who knows? The world is a different place where things travel and people move and people travel. It could show up in Timbuktu, but it would be, I'm like you. I'm an optimist in that I think there have to be other ones out there somewhere. And I just wish the Alderman Library copy would. All you have to do is leave it on in a bassinet on a church, the steps of a church, and run. Somebody ought to turn it in if it's around.
Yeah, if anybody finds one, just bring it to the Poe Museum. Just drop it on our doorstep.
Leave it on the step of the Poe Museum, front door of the Poe Museum. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's just taking up space at your house. Bring it on down here. We'll put it on display, share it with the world.
Look, if there's any place in the world where there should be a copy of the Poe Museum, is one of those places, that's for sure. It's amazing how many major institutions do not have one. I mean, the Morgan Library, doesn't have one. You think of certain places where they have everything, pretty much everything like this. And there's been a lot of facsimiles done. I'm sure the Poe Museum has most, if not all, of the facsimiles.
Yeah, we've got some of the facsimiles.
Some of those are really good too. The
1923 one looks really nice.
It's great, yeah. I mostly use the one that Columbia University Press did. It's in a little plain binding like this, and it's the publication of the Facsimile Text Society with Mabbotts. I don't know if they can see that, but it's this edition is really great because the notes in the back are fantastic, or the notes in the front, actually. The long introduction, in which at that time, I think it's 51, at that time it was, 51. He was introducing new ideas about the publication of the book and interesting biographical details about Poe's life at that time. So, which there's still not all that much known, because he too was a forger in a lot of ways. I mean, he kept forging his name, changing his name. Even when he published, correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, when he was up in Boston and arranged for publication of Tamerlane, he also joined the army, and I think he enlisted under Edgar A. Perry.
Yes, correct.
I think that's right. Yeah. So if you think of that, I mean, he was very equal to reinventing himself and redoing himself and essentially forging it, new names. And what an interesting man, what an interesting story. And you stop to think of how much he accomplished in such a short period of time. I mean, this first book is 1827, and he died, his anniversary is next week, right, Chris?
Yep, October
The
7th.
anniversary of his, yeah, so it's coming right up. And the amount of work he accomplished in those couple of plus decades is an amazement, actually. Changed the course of American literature and world literature. It was quite a feat. These are humble beginnings, though, Tamerlane. Although I've read the poem a few times now, and the Byronic flourishes aside, there's Poe is in there, and even the other poems, the Tamerlane and Other Poems. So a couple of the other poems are really quite wonderful, and you can see in them, the beginnings. So, the writer we know is Edgar Allan Poe. You can see the darkness is there, that's for sure.
And this guy is 18 years old this time. He's just run away from home and had set his sights on publishing his first book.
Amazing when you think about it. And in his little introduction, his short preface, he makes the claim that they were written when he was 14. And they had to be written sometime before he was 18, no matter what he says, even if they were written when he's 50. What does it matter? It's a pretty amazing juvenilia.
And the one, you actually used Susan Taine's copy for the cover of your book. And one thing that always strikes me is that this copy, someone 100 years ago used it as a coaster.
Yes. It makes Susan's copy just easily the most recognizable. Here I have one here. I'll just show you can see that there was one reaction from a person at the publishing house who shall remain unnamed because he's now completely changed his mind, who said, "Oh, it looks like somebody set a pitcher of water on the darn thing. It looks terrible. You can't go with that." And it's like, oh no, it's a beautiful cover. It's exactly, and yes, that shows just how much that book at the time was taken care of. And they use the same on the back cover, the same rules and around. It's spectacular. The coloration on the book is somewhat different than the actual original, which is more of a tea color. It's more drab than my novel is, the cover of my novel. But I was very happy when the publisher, when they saw that. And it was great of Susan to allow us to do it. I might add, I don't know whether you noticed this, Chris, but the end papers, this you might not be able to see. There's a manuscript also from Susan's collection. So you get a little of Poe's handwriting in the book as well.
She has one of the earliest manuscripts, Spirits of the Dead, from 1829.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Which is sort of perfect for the book, too. And it's right in the same period, 1827, 1829. I long to come down there, Chris, and see the museum.
Yeah, definitely.
I see your raven behind you over your left shoulder.
We have all the first editions except for Tamerlane and the prose romances. So we've got all the Raff poems, the Raven. And I guess as I mentioned to you earlier, we've got a great, beautiful garden here, the Enchanted Garden, which is haunted by our cats.
The cat's name, one is Edgar and the other is?
Pluto.
Pluto, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. And Pluto's a black cat, am I right?
Yeah, they're both black cats, but Pluto has the white patch that we think resembles the gallows.
Oh yeah, okay, that's great. Well, I think not only I, but everybody should visit that museum at some point who's interested in Poe. It's I even had the hotel picked out. But this, now that the pandemic set in, it's just no traveling at the moment. But if and when the pandemic lifts, it'll be my first destination.
And it'll be the paperback.
The paperback will be next year. Yeah.
And is there anything from the novel that you'd care to read right now for us?
Sure, if you want. I could just read the novels. Are hard to excerpt from unless they're standalones, and this has no standalone parts. But I could read just the opening so that it's bleeding just at one end rather than both ends. So here's how the book opens. A scream shattered the night. At first it sounded feral, inhuman, even unworldly. I leaped up from my wingback reading chair in the study, dropping my book on the wide plank floor, and heard my husband's studio door jolt open at the back of the house. When he found me waiting in the front hall, he was gripping his letterpress composing stick, still wearing his stained apron with its rich scent of printer's ink. We said nothing, just waited in shaken silence. Our sash windows were raised, both upstairs and down, to let in the evening air, and the outside noises we both knew often seemed closer in the dark. Still, the scream was so sharp it seemed to have emanated from nearby, maybe even from the unmowed yard out front. I wondered, hoped really, if coyotes were about to chorus, as the local pack sometimes did upon being prodded by the single wailing cry of an alpha individual. But no other voices joined in. By the time we opened the door of the farmhouse, surrounded by enveloping black maples, the world was calm again, aside from the moths and nameless insects thudding against the porch light, and from indoors, the faint continuation of a piano concerto by Saint-Saëns on the radio. Maisie, I shouted, peering into the near darkness past the overgrown hedge of lilacs that bordered the yard as I called our daughter's name. Moths and Saint-Saëns were joined by the drone of crickets from every quarter of the woods and fields around the house. Nothing else. Often I reminded myself the lone coyote who isn't answered simply moves along. Or perhaps what we'd heard was the death screech of a rabbit being killed by one of those same neighborhood coyotes. In Ireland once, I heard a hare being snatched from life, probably by a hungry fox, and the blood-curdling scream that ripped the night in half was one I'd never forgotten. My husband called her name again, louder. Maisie! Our older daughter, Nicole, who still lived in our East Village apartment, wouldn't join us upstate until the weekend, several days hence. But young Maisie was spending her August here, as she'd done for half a dozen years running, at the restored farmhouse in the Hudson Valley, where we'd made it our annual custom to take off work the last month of the summer and flee the city for greener terrain. Earlier that afternoon, she had biked, as she often did, the couple of miles to town, if a church, gas station with deli, antiques barn, and roadside bar can be so designated, to hang around with friends, play video games, stream movies, maybe cook out. Her girlfriends sometimes came here too, even though we couldn't provide them with a decent internet connection, and the joys of bird watching, picking wild blueberries, and swimming in the nearby water hole only went so far. She should be heading home at any moment. Whereas the scream unsettled us before, now it was the throbbing quiet. At 8:30 this time of year, there was still light, if faint and swift fading. Without exchanging a word, Will and I had been married some 2 decades and often intuited each other's thoughts. We hastened down the steps, across the uneven bluestone path, and out to the country road where we headed in the direction of town. Whether consciously or not, he still brandished his metal composing stick, a classic tool used by centuries of letterpress printers, and one, I expect, rarely, if ever used to fend off a possible assailant. We hadn't gone 50 paces before we caught sight of her coming toward us, dully luminescent against the murky backdrop. not racing on her bicycle, as that shriek, now I knew it had been human, might have led me to expect. She was walking along with an oddly deliberate, slow, rigid gait, her head tilted forward. When we reached her, I saw the determination set on her tear-streaked face, ashen as pumice in the waning light. My words tumbled over Will's as we stood together in the unpaved road, hugging the girl, stiff with fear between us. Maisie, what happened? Was that you? Are you hurt? Your brother was all she said in response, her voice reedy and breathless, gripping the handles of her old Schwinn black bomber, which she had spotted at a yard sale several summers before and lovingly restored with her father. Looking over at my husband, I saw that he was as bewildered as I. You mean Uncle Adam? I asked, as gently as I could, glancing around the growing darkness, feeling at once alarmed and a little foolish. He was just there, she insisted, voice tight, and pointed back down the road in the direction she had been coming from. But Maisie, my brother's been gone since before you were even born. He's not with us anymore. You know that. She shook her head violently, like a much younger girl. He was, though. I know he's dead, but he looked just like in the photos. Stay here, Will said, and walked back down into the gloaming, beyond where we could see him, less to confirm whether my dead brother was inexplicably, impossibly lurking there, than to convince Maisie that the road was deserted. When he returned to us, striding with a bit of fatherly exaggeration, he assured her, nobody's down there, honey. No ghosts, no nothing. Even the birds have gone to bed. But they're there.
A great opening. So now you all have to go out and buy your copies to find out what happens next. And
there you go.
Right, they're available right now. And before we go, I wanted to thank you for speaking with us and for helping promote Poe's legacy and letting maybe more people take a second look in their attic to see if they have a copy of Tamerlane up there. And
look around.
Couldn't help but notice you have a little Poe behind you.
I do. I'm not a Poe collector but I will bring it over. This is my little treasure. I don't know whether you can see it. There we go. It's hard to get the light in here.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. There it is. Yeah, you were kind of helpful to me there too, Chris.
Look. Oh, great. And what inspired you to get that?
Well, I have a funny tradition because I'm a book collector. I'm a bibliomaniac, actually a bibliophile. And whenever I write a book and I get an advance, I treat myself I buy one book that I wouldn't buy otherwise. I just, don't think about what it costs. And so when I bought, well, for instance, when I wrote The Forgers, I bought a set of Arthur Conan Doyle's complete works in dust jackets, a signed limited set. It's rare for the jackets. It's seldom seen in dust jackets, so I got that. I mean, way back when, probably the most money I was ever paid for a book was Giovanni's Gift, and I went out and splurged on a signed copy of James Joyce's Ulysses, the one of 100, the Eric Gill edition from the 30s, not the 1922 first. And so with Poe, as you well know, collecting Poe is not the easiest thing to do, A, and B, if you want to get into it, you need some pretty deep pockets to get the good material. So this photograph just had surfaced with a dealer who had picked it up in California somewhere, and just the gambrel, the beautiful frame, and the condition of it. I just thought, and it wasn't a huge, overwhelming amount of money.
Yeah.
It wasn't cheap, but I just thought that's okay. That's Forger's Daughter memento. So the next one, who knows what I'll get from the next one. But that was it just sort of magically sort of appeared in my life. And this was pre-pandemic, and I went up to the shop and I looked at it. I thought, I'm not leaving here without that. So I actually have three authors, well, four. There's a photograph of Samuel Beckett over here, but back here is Thomas Hardy, and you can't see that at all, but it's Virginia Woolf, an unpublished photograph of Virginia Woolf. And the Hardy is just a studio portrait. But so those are four of my favorite writers. There's a number of others, but I sort of keep them around me in my writing.
Well, hopefully he'll be an inspiration for your next one. What's on the slate for the next one?
Well, I think since the first one was Arthur Conan Doyle, and then the new one here is obviously Edgar Allan Poe, I thought a third volume would have to be Agatha Christie, because to me those are the three writers who I like the most, and there's a lot about Christie's life that is not known, and certainly her autobiography leaves more to be more questioned than it's like Paul Bowles wrote a biography called Without Asking, and Tennessee Williams joked around saying that the book should have been called Without Telling. And in a way, Agatha Christie's autobiography is the same way. She elides, we'll say. She leaves out a lot of interesting things, particularly the 11 days, the disappearance, where she just disappeared off the face of the earth for 11 days. Again, about 100 years, almost to the year after Edgar Allan Poe published Tamerlane. So I'm reading a lot of Agatha Christie right now, and I think that might be a third volume, but we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody out there for listening. Any parting words you have, or words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. Look in your attic. No,
there you go. That's a good one.
Look in your attic. Just make sure you look around. It's quarantine times in the spring. I was hoping one would show up then, when people are going through old boxes and books and straightening things out. But no, I hope everyone likes the book, and I really would urge people to support the Poe Museum in any way possible. And thanks so much for having me, Chris, and thanks for your expert advice during the writing of the book. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and it's good getting to know you. So we'll see you here at the Poe Museum sometime.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, thanks.